Blood dripped down young Julian Reed's cheek at 30,000 feet, silencing the entire cabin. A successful businessman's racist outburst left a 7-year-old child reeling and sparked a chain reaction that would test the limits of power, privilege, and justice. Who will stand up when the system is rigged against the vulnerable? How far will one family go to protect a child denied the medical care he desperately needs? Meet Clara Reed, a devoted nurse and single mother. Derek Hayes, an Army veteran with a prosthetic leg and unwavering moral compass. And Victoria Lane, a civil rights attorney driven by principle. From the tense moments aboard a Boeing 737 to the halls of Boston's top courts and hospitals, every step reveals another layer of conspiracy, influence, and courage. What happens when media empires, political connections, and hospital boards unite to crush dissent? And more importantly, can truth and solidarity overcome escalating threats? Prepare for heartbreak, triumph, and unyielding resolve in a story where silence serves oppression and the tiniest voice can ignite a revolution. If you believe in standing up against injustice, like, share, and subscribe now, and join us as we unveil the Reed family's fight for justice. When the crimson stain blossomed on Julian Reed's cheek, the cabin fell into a hush so complete it felt like the roar of the engines had stilled. At 30,000 feet on the Crest Air Voyager flight bound from Clearwater to Bay Bridge, 7-year-old Julian Reed sat frozen, his small body trembling as a single teardrop clung to his lashes. The handprint, raw, burning, marred the smooth curve of his cheek, and he could taste copper on his tongue even before the metallic scent of blood momentarily filled his nostrils. All at once, every passenger felt the weight of that moment, a brutal rupture in the routine hum of air travel. Business travelers paused mid-email. Mothers clutched their handbags. Children's games and earbud playlists were abandoned. Even the flight crew, trained to treat upset stomachs and medical scares, seemed rooted to the spot by the shock of witnessing a grown man's hate-fueled violence against a child. No one dared move until Derek Hayes rose from seat 14C. 8 years had etched lines of experience into the Army veteran's face, and where his right leg once was now gleamed a high-grade prosthetic, its polished alloy catching the cabin lights like a promise of strength. His movements were deliberate, each step carrying the quiet authority of a man who had stared down danger far beyond any mid-air confrontation. "Sir," he said, voice low and measured, the heat of controlled fury just beneath its surface. "You've made the biggest mistake of your life." Clara Reed pressed her hand to Julian Reed's back, her nurse's instincts kicking in even as her heart pounded. She'd booked this flight 8 months ago, the first available slot for the young boy's neurological consultation at the Riverside Pediatric Center. Her double shifts at the Bay Bridge General Hospital had paid for one-way tickets and a hopeful tomorrow. And now, her son's face was streaming blood. "Mommy," Julian Reed whimpered, voice small as his hands covered the wound, pressing a napkin against the bleeding. I'm sorry." His apology rose in a whisper, but the cabin air seemed too brittle to hold it. Clara Reed knelt to scoop her son into her arms, tears welling. "It's not your fault, baby. It's not your fault." Moments earlier, Clara Reed had been reviewing digital scans of Julian Reed's MRI best case, enough to secure a full 2 hours of calm. But the man in front of them, Henry Blackwood, had not wanted calm. Dressed in charcoal tailoring that matched his thin, pale visage, he had muttered his disapproval from the moment they boarded. "I paid for first class. He had grumbled to the balding man beside him, voice tight with entitlement, but this equipment swap left me stuck with people who don't know how to parent. Each time Julian Reed's restless foot brushed Henry Blackwood's seat, the white businessman's face would contort, lips tightening into a sneer, and the sneer had broken at last into full-blown rage. Control your child. Henry Blackwood had hissed loudly enough for half the cabin to hear as they settled. His gold signet ring still gleamed when he tapped his glass of ginger ale, as if to punctuate his ownership of both seat and status. "Mommy, he's staring," Julian Reed had whispered, small jaw set in worry. Clara Reed offered a reassuring smile, but the tension in her shoulders betrayed her calm. "Let's draw, sweetheart," she said, passing him the coloring book she'd packed. But as crayons skittered across the aisle and Julian Reed naturally leaned forward to retrieve them, the scene snapped. Henry Blackwood turned, his glass sloshing a crimson echo of the moment to come. "I've had enough of this," he roared. Before Clara Reed could intervene, his palm struck out. The slap cut through the cabin silence like a gunshot. Julian Reed's sobs spilled out, small and raw, as blood dripped down his cheek. That's when Derek Hayes acted. His veteran's stance was firm, unyielding. He blocked the narrow aisle like a sentinel of justice. "You laid hands on a child," he said with such calm force that every passenger felt it. "An innocent child, and you will answer for it. For a heartbeat." Henry Blackwood's fury rippled and then retreated as the entire aircraft's attention turned toward him. The murmurs rose a veteran's prosthetic leg, a bleeding child, a mother's protective fury, all witnessed by dozens of strangers now bound by a single-purpose truth. The rest of the flight blurred. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom, calling for seat belts. Flight attendants moved quickly. Olivia Chen, her practiced smile replaced by concern, knelt beside Clara Reed, fetching ice packs and first aid supplies. Behind her, passengers shifted, some offering tissues, others sitting stoic, mothers clutching hands, fathers cradling children closer. Clara Reed held Julian Reed as Derek Hayes directed Henry Blackwood to a vacant seat at the front, where he could no longer menace. The businessman's protestations echoed hollow. "This is outrageous. I demand an apology," but the cabin's verdict was already clear. People rallied around the small family, strangers united in collective defiance. The flight attendant escorted Henry Blackwood away with calm firmness, and by the time the Crest Air Voyager began its descent into Bay Bridge, the story of that slap had ignited something larger than any one flight. That night, as lights twinkled beneath clouds, Clara Reed comforted her exhausted son. Julian Reed buried his face in her shoulder. Derek Hayes, now a guardian in uniform and in principle, sat in the seat beside them, fatigue lining his eyes but resolve shining through. "Thank you," Clara Reed whispered. "I don't know what I'd have done without you." Derek Hayes simply offered a soldier's nod. No one should stand by when hate strikes the innocent. We did what was right. Outside the window, Bay Bridge's skyline glimmered a city unaware that justice had been served above the clouds that day. But for Clara Reed, Julian Reed, and Derek Hayes, the ride was far from over. Ahead lay courtrooms, headlines, and battles for truth. Yet they faced them with a bond forged in courage, carried by the promise that even at 30,000 feet, the smallest voice could rally a cabin to stand for what is right. A charged hush filled the cabin after Derek Hayes had firmly planted Henry Blackwood at the front row. For a moment, the veteran remained close to Clara Reed and Julian Reed, scanning the aisle with the vigilance of a sentinel. Then, lowering his voice so only Henry Blackwood could hear, he said with quiet conviction, "The only nuisance on this flight is the grown man who just assaulted a 7-year-old child with special needs." A ripple of recognition passed through the passengers. Several rose back. A mother clasped her toddler tightly. An elderly man shifted in his seat, eyes narrowing at the bully-turned assailant. Henry Blackwood's confident sneer finally cracked as he glanced around, realizing the tide of public opinion had turned. His voice faltered. "I'm a paying customer. I have rights." But Olivia Chen, the flight attendant, cut through his protests. Pushing past frozen bodies, she knelt beside Clara Reed. "Sir," she said to Henry Blackwood, her tone firm, "you need to return to your own seat immediately. Striking another passenger is a federal offense." She turned back to Henry Blackwood, eyes unyielding. "I need you to come with me to a different seat while we sort this out." Rage and indignation contended on Henry Blackwood's face. "Me? What about them?" he barked, motioning at Clara Reed and Julian Reed. "This is outrageous." At that moment, the captain's voice crackled through the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're expecting turbulence ahead. Please return to your seats and fasten your seat belts." Olivia Chen hesitated, torn between diffusing conflict and keeping the cabin safe. Derek Hayes remained unshaken in 14C. "I'll stay here until this man is moved away from that child," he declared, voice steady. Henry Blackwood's face twisted. "Do you know who I am? You can't dictate my seat assignment." Derek Hayes met his gaze without flinching. "I know exactly what you are. And unless you want to find out what happens when you assault a child in front of a plane full of witnesses, you'll find another seat." Faced with Derek Hayes's unbreakable resolve and the silent cabin closing ranks around the family, Henry Blackwood snatched his laptop bag and stormed forward, muttering threats of lawsuits. As he passed, Olivia Chen knelt beside Julian Reed once more. She pressed a small ice pack to his cheek. "Let me get you some ice for that cheek, sweetie." Her apology was genuine, but it barely masked the conflict in her eyes. Clara Reed sniffled, brushing away tears. "Thank you," she whispered. Derek Hayes moved into the vacated seat beside her, gently placing a hand on Julian Reed's other shoulder. "I'm Derek Hayes, former Army medic. Mind if I take a look at that cut?" Clara Reed's gratitude was fierce and immediate. "Please," she said, voice trembling. As Derek Hayes examined the wound, cleaning it and wrapping it in a sanitary pad, the captain announced a holding pattern over Bay Bridge air traffic control delays would add 90 minutes to their arrival. A collective groan rose, but Clara Reed only pressed Julian Reed closer. "We can't miss that appointment," she murmured. Derek Hayes offered a reassuring smile. "First things first. Let's make sure our brave young man here is all right. Then we'll figure out the rest." Moments later, Olivia Chen returned with first aid supplies and the incident report forms. "Here are some forms to complete," she said, voice professional yet soft. "Airport police will meet us at the gate for statements. I should warn you, Mr. Blackwood is threatening to press charges for harassment." Clara Reed's face darkened. "Harassment. My son was assaulted." Olivia Chen nodded briskly. "That's why they'll be involved." Derek Hayes frowned thoughtfully. "Something is off with her response," he muttered. "Too rehearsed." Across the aisle, A Hispanic woman offered a silent nod of solidarity. A few rows back, an Asian businessman approached. Lowering his voice, I recorded what happened on my phone. If you need a witness statement, I'll help. One by one. Passengers stepped forward. A college student lent Julian Reed her tablet loaded with soothing games. An elderly black couple formed a protective arc around the family. Derek Hayes observed quietly, pride in his eyes. Sometimes good people find their courage after the initial shock wears off, he said. Reminds me of my unit in Afghanistan. Clara Reed managed a shaky smile. Thank you again for everything. The plane finally descended toward Harborview International Airport. Julian Reed clutched his dinosaur backpack, anxiety written across his features. Will the police arrest me? Mommy, Clara Reed, held him tight. No, baby, you did nothing wrong. The jet taxied to the gate, and a hush fell as uniformed officers and a plainclothes detective boarded. To everyone's surprise, Henry Blackwood swaggered forward, pointing at Clara Reed and Julian Reed. The detective raised a silent hand, inviting Derek Hayes forward. Officer, Derek Hayes said, voice firm, I'm a direct witness. This man assaulted that child unprovoked. The detective's gaze flickered between statements. We'll take statements from everyone involved. Please remain seated. Henry Blackwood insisted Julian Reed had scratched him, producing a small mark that wasn't there before the flight. Derek Hayes opened his mouth to object, but the detective held up a hand. An Asian businessman stood. I have video evidence. The detective paused, expression unreadable. We'll continue off the aircraft. Mr. Blackwood, please come with Officer Chin. Ma'am, he turned to Clara Reed. You and your son will accompany Officer Wallace. As they deplaned under watchful eyes, Derek Hayes stayed by Clara Reed's side. His presence was a bulwark against further intimidation, a promise that justice would follow them off the plane. With Julian Reed's little hand in hers, Clara Reed exhaled, tears of relief mingling with exhaustion. Though the journey ahead would include courtrooms and media storms, they walked forward together, united by the bravery of one veteran who refused to let hatred go unanswered. The terminal's fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as Clara Reed and Julian Reed were led down a quiet corridor, separated from Derek Hayes by a glass partition. Hours stretched thin as statements were recorded one after another. The Asian businessman who had captured the assault on his phone sat in a sterile room, frustration etched on his face. He replayed the video again and again, but each time, the file glitched or refused to load. Impossible. He protested. I watched it clearly in the cabin. A request went out for airport security footage from the gate area, but came back redacted system upgrades in progress. It seemed too coincidental. Meanwhile, in a small interviewing room down the hall, Julian Reed grew more restless. His rare but neurological condition made stillness nearly impossible. His legs curled and uncurling beneath him, his fingers tracing invisible patterns on the vinyl seat. Clara Reed whispered through the door, her voice tight with worry. Sweetheart, I know it's hard. They'll let you have your medicine soon. Outside, the air of the terminal felt thick. Porter clerks wheeled carts. Travelers drifted to their gates, oblivious to the family's ordeal. Finally, Derek Hayes stepped into view, his expression grave. They let Henry Blackwood go less than 30 minutes ago. He said, voice low, he made some calls. walked right out to a black SUV. Clara Reed glanced at her watch. "No, our appointment," she whispered, lungs tightening. 8 months of planning dissolved in an instant. Derek Hayes placed a steady hand on her shoulder. "I'll handle this. I've got a friend, a lawyer here in Baybridge. Let's get your luggage and find a taxi." As they gathered bags from the carousel, Henry Blackwood reemerged smug, triumphant. He raised his phone, snapped a photo of the family, then slid into the waiting vehicle. Clara Reed wrapped her arms around Julian Reed, shielding him from the man's final glare. Their taxi pulled away. The terminal doors slid shut on Olivia Chen, who watched from inside, phone clutched. She hovered over an unsent message on her screen, torn between reporting the truth and fearing airline retaliation. At the hotel, Clara Reed tucked Julian Reed into the narrow bed. The boy's eyes fluttered shut, exhaustion overriding anxiety. But Clara Reed's mind raced. She reached for her phone. Boston Children's hadn't called yet, and her screen lit up with a new post: "Unruly child attacks businessman on flight. Father threatens violence." The accompanying photo of Henry Blackwood, immaculate and outraged, went viral almost immediately. Her heart sank. "That's not us," she whispered. On her screen, every major news outlet repeated the same distortions, all tied back to Kensington Media Group. Hateful messages flooded her social feeds. "Teach your kids manners. Shouldn't have had children." Some included their hotel address. "How did they find us?" Panic rose in her voice. Derek Hayes gently took her phone. "That airport photo I took, it still has location data. Let's move." He packed their few belongings with urgent precision. "My friend Alexandra's guest house, safe place until we figure this out." As they hurried out, Clara Reed's phone rang. A formal voice. "Mrs. Reed, this is Dr. Samuel Foster from Riverside Pediatric Center." Relief surged until the clinical edge in his tone snapped it back. "Due to a security concern, we must postpone your appointment." Clara Reed's breath caught. "My son needs that treatment." "I'm sorry," he said. "Policy is policy. We'll call when circumstances change." She stared at the blank screen. This can't be real. Derek Hayes's jaw hardened. "Kensington's reach is longer than I thought, but two can play at this game." He tapped out a swift post on his phone, a clear, fact-based account of the flight incident. A hashtag, "Justice for Julian." Within minutes, his veteran advocacy network amplified it. Civil rights groups joined. Night fell on Baybridge. Clara Reed sank onto the sofa, phone slipping from her hand. "I can't lose my job, too." She sobbed. Derek Hayes wrapped an arm around her. "We'll figure it out together." On the television, Henry Blackwood appeared on a national news program, feigning outrage as victim. Clara Reed turned it off in disgust. Tomorrow, they would fight back. But for now, hope flickered in the solidarity that had already formed around them, proof that even in the face of overwhelming power, truth and community could light the way forward. The television glowed in the living room of the Maplewood guest house, and Clara Reed sat rigid beside Julian Reed, who pressed his cheek to a soft pillow. On the screen, Henry Blackwood was ensconced in a plush news studio, his tailored suit as immaculate as his tone was contrived. "I've always advocated for children with special needs," he told the sympathetic host, the lie polished with practiced sincerity. "That's why today's incident was so disturbing. When a child becomes violent on an aircraft, it jeopardizes everyone aboard." Clara Reed swallowed hard. Violence wasn't the word she'd choose, nor was it ever her son who'd been violent. She reached out, turning off the set. Derek Hayes, seated on the sofa, gave a low growl of disgust. He's trying to rewrite history. Derek Hayes muttered, mask his prejudice with self-righteous outrage. That night, sleep eluded Clara Reed. Her phone buzzed with alerts. CEO Henry Blackwood donates millions to children's charities. Exclusive interview, Blackwood speaks out. Each headline felt like a blow. By dawn, she'd wiped tears from her cheeks and noted with horror the latest alert: breaking Child Services investigation opens in Reed case. She pressed her trembling fingers to her lips. "He's coming after my child," she whispered. A knock came at the door. Victoria Lane, a civil rights attorney and Derek Hayes's longtime friend, strode in carrying a thick manila folder. Victoria Lane's eyes were sharp. No nonsense. Blackwood isn't just spinning a story, he's weaponizing his media empire, Victoria Lane said, spreading documents across the coffee table. Divorced 3 times, no kids of his own, built his fortune on sensationalism, and now a Senate run under a family values banner. Clara Reed sank into a chair, exhaustion pooling in her bones. Derek Hayes leaned forward. "What's our play?" Victoria Lane tapped the folder. "First, we document every scrap of evidence. Then, we file assault charges against him, and we locate witnesses, passengers, crew, anyone with proof." A notification chimed on Derek Hayes's phone. He held it up, a direct message from Olivia Chen, the flight attendant. "I want to help. Meet me in public." Victoria Lane narrowed her eyes. Could be a trap. "Public place only, and I'm coming with you." As they made plans to meet Olivia Chen at the Hideaway Cafe, Clara Reed comforted Julian Reed in the next room, smoothing his hair, promising him they'd rebuild what had been shattered. Outside, the storm of headlines gathered momentum, but inside, the family prepared to fight back with truth as their shield. Late that afternoon, in the hushed conference room of Harbor Legal Alliance, Victoria Lane laid out a startling truth. Blackwood Worldwide Holdings owns 30% of Crestair's parent company, she announced, pointing to a chart. When Henry Blackwood was calmly dialing his phone mid-flight, he wasn't just calling lawyers, he was calling Crestair headquarters. The room fell silent. Clara Reed pressed her hand to Julian Reed's shoulder, her voice a whisper that explains the airline's lukewarm response and why the video files mysteriously vanished. Derek Hayes leaned forward. "We need to prepare. If he can pull strings at the airline, nothing is off limits." As Olivia Chen slipped out, promising to arrive at Victoria Lane's office the next morning, no one noticed the man at the neighboring table, his gaze unwavering. That evening, as Clara Reed adjusted Julian Reed's blanket at Maplewood Guest House, her phone buzzed. Caller ID Judge Ellis's clerk, Mrs. Reed, said the clerk's formal tone. "Judge Catherine Ellis has granted Mr. Blackwood's request for a temporary restraining order. You and your counsel are prohibited from making any public statements about the incident pending further litigation." Outraged, Victoria Lane snatched up her phone. "This is Attorney Lane. Mrs. Reed's counsel. We received no notice of a hearing." But the clerk cut her off. The judge deemed it an ex parte emergency to prevent ongoing reputational harm. Written order to follow. Contempt charges may apply for violation. The line went dead. Victoria Lane slammed the phone onto the desk. "This isn't accidental. There's campaign money behind this. A quick search confirmed $50,000 in donations from Blackwood Enterprises to Judge Ellis's last campaign. Derek Hayes's face darkened. So we're gagged while Henry Blackwood floods the airwaves with his version. Victoria Lane paced. We'll file a motion to recuse Judge Ellis' conflict of interest, and we'll draft counterclaims defamation, assault, civil rights violations. As midnight approached, Clara Reed checked on Julian Reed, now resting but still thin and tremulous. He'd suffered another anxiety attack, his arm shaking as he asked when he could finally go home. Then Victoria Lane's paralegal burst in on a late-night call. Emergency psychological evaluation filed for Julian Reed. They allege his violent tendencies pose a threat requiring court supervision. Clara Reed froze. They want to take my son. Victoria Lane's eyes hardened. Not on my watch. She turned to Derek Hayes. Mobilize every contact veteran groups, civil rights networks, parent advocates. We may be gagged, but our allies can still speak out. Outside, Olivia Chen sat across from corporate security, being coerced into signing an NDA under threat of termination, another sign of Henry Blackwood's reach. The next morning, Clara Reed and Derek Hayes stood before the glass facade of Riverside Pediatric Center. Julian Reed clutched Clara Reed's hand, his small face drawn and anxious. Inside, Dr. Elaine Brooks, once warm and encouraging, now barely looked up from her tablet. "I'm sorry to press. Dr. Brooks," Clara Reed said, voice trembling. "Has anything changed with his treatment protocol, Dr.?" Brooks glanced away. "We follow strict guidelines. Complicating factors, behavioral issues have made him ineligible for the neural therapy trial." Derek Hayes's military bearing made the question sound more like a demand. "What behavioral issues, Doctor?" Brooks hesitated. Recent incidents, flight disruptions. That was when Clara Reed realized Henry Blackwood's influence had infiltrated this very hospital. She gripped Julian Reed's hand, determination flaring. This ends now. Across the lobby, Victoria Lane tapped furiously on her tablet requests for emergency injunctive relief, motions to remove Judge Ellis, and a federal complaint alleging coordinated media suppression and corporate harassment. They had every reason to fear Henry Blackwood's power, but united mother, veteran, attorney, and small boy they would fight. Because justice, once struck down, could still be lifted up by enough unwavering hands. The morning light in the private dining room of Maplewood Guest House filtered through gauzy curtains as Clara Reed and Julian Reed sat opposite Derek Hayes and Victoria Lane, their attorney. Papers lay strewn across the antique table, financial records, legal motions, and news clippings. Victoria tapped a highlighted line in her notes. Blackwood Worldwide Holdings owns 30% of Crestair's parent company, she said. When Henry Blackwood made those calls mid-flight, he wasn't just pleading his case to attorneys. He was calling the airline's corporate offices. Clara Reed's heart thudded. "That explains the vanishing footage," she whispered, voice tight, and the airline's stonewalling only grew stronger afterward. Derek Hayes slammed his fist into his palm. "He's got corporate reach, but we have right on our side." Victoria slid a new document forward. "Judge Catherine Ellis has granted a temporary restraining order against you. No public statements until litigation ends. Blackwood's legal team pulled strings. He donated $50,000 to her campaign last year." Clara Reed closed her eyes. Fighting panic? The gag order felt like chains. Victoria Lane met her gaze. "We'll file to recuse Judge Ellis for conflict of interest. In the meantime, we prepare counterclaims, defamation, assault, civil rights violations." That evening, in the warm glow of the guest house kitchen, Clara Reed tucked Julian Reed into the sofa with a fleece blanket. His small body shook as he recounted another anxiety attack under a stranger's watch in that sterile interview room. "Mommy," he whispered, voice quivering. "Why did he hurt me?" Her own voice cracked as she kissed his forehead. "He was wrong, sweetheart. I'm so sorry." Derek Hayes entered, face grim. Alexandra's assistant calls Julian Reed is under threat of emergency psychological evaluation. They claim his behavior is dangerous. Clara Reed gasped. "They want to take him away," Victoria's jaw set. "They'll need a court order and our challenge. Call in everyone, veteran networks, civil rights groups, parent advocates. Even if we can't speak publicly, they can." Meanwhile, Olivia Chen was swept into a corporate meeting under threat of termination. She sat across from stern executives demanding every shred of evidence or her airline ID would be revoked. By dawn, Clara Reed, Derek Hayes, and Victoria Lane stood at the revolving doors of Riverside Pediatric Center. Julian Reed clutched Clara Reed's hand. His tremor had worsened. Holding a puzzle piece made his fingers spin like frightened birds. At check-in, the receptionist's forced smile barely concealed recognition. Clara Reed stammered, "We're here for Dr. Elaine Brooks." A cold nod followed. The waiting area's other families glanced over, some with sympathy, others with guarded uncertainty. After nearly an hour, Dr. Elaine Brooks, who once greeted Julian Reed with warmth, appeared detached. She offered Clara Reed a thin apology. "I'm sorry. Our recommendations must follow current protocols. Given recent behavioral incidents, your son isn't eligible for the TMS trial." Derek Hayes rose, voice steady. "What incidents? What evidence supports this change, doctor?" Brooks met his gaze for a fleeting second. "We base decisions on all available data," she said, unwilling to elaborate. That word data stung like betrayal. Clara Reed caught Derek Hayes's eye. After the doctor left, Derek pulled out his phone. "I'm calling Victoria. There's more to uncover here." They reconvened in the hospital cafeteria, where Victoria Lane revealed that the hospital's foundation had received $10 million from the Blackwood Family Trust last year, earmarked for neuroscience. 3 members of the hospital board were senior executives from Blackwood Media Group. Clara Reed's shoulders slumped. "This is malpractice discrimination funded by his money." Victoria packed her folder. "We'll confront the chief medical officer, Dr. Robert Sterling. Patient rights, ethics violations, everything on the table, in the administrative offices on the top floor." Victoria Lane's steely resolve won them a meeting with Dr. Sterling and the hospital's legal counsel. She detailed the financial ties, the sudden treatment reversal, and the gag order silencing the Reeds. Dr. Sterling listened, impassive, before insisting that medical decisions remained strictly clinical. Victoria leaned in. "Yet a major donor influences those decisions. That is exactly what happened." The CMO's eyes flicked to a trembling Julian Reed beside Clara Reed. Finally, he conceded to personally review Dr. Brooks's notes and to ensure no further donor interference, but only if they refrained from unfounded accusations. As they left, hospital security discreetly shadowed them another warning sign. In the parking garage, they paused beneath a donor wall emblazoned with Blackwood Family Trust in platinum letters. Clara Reed traced the name with trembling fingers. "He denied care to my son for revenge," she said, voice raw. Derek Hayes helped Julian Reed into the car. "Money and power can corrupt," he said softly. Inside, Victoria Lane sent her next strategic filings: medical discrimination, patient rights violations, and an injunction against any further unapproved treatment changes. As the car pulled away, Clara Reed held Julian Reed's hand, voice steady despite despair. "Sometimes, baby, people with power forget the rules apply to them too, but we'll show them they're wrong." Julian Reed looked up, voice small but fierce. "Is it because of my skin color?" Silence answered him, the terrible simplicity of the question hanging in late morning light. Yet in that silence lay their resolve they would not rest until justice's promise outshone the shadows cast by wealth and influence. Rev. Margaret Clark appeared at the guest house door just as dawn's pale light filtered through the curtains. A tall, dignified woman in her 60s. Her silver hair framed a face whose warmth belied the steely resolve in her eyes. She offered Clara Reed a gentle smile. "Victoria Lane told me what you're facing," she said softly. "Our congregation wants to help." In the cramped kitchen, Clara Reed, still wearing last night's robe, listened as Rev. Margaret Clark described a rotating network of safe homes. "Each house is run by families who know what it's like to stand against systemic injustice," she explained. "You and Julian Reed can move every few days, keep your location private, and have the support you need." Tears filled Clara Reed's eyes. In the week since the assault, the gag order, the hospital's betrayal, and the barrage of hate messages, hope had felt distant. Now, it returned in the form of open arms and shared experiences. "Why would you help strangers like this?" she whispered. "Because we've been where you are," Rev. Margaret Clark replied, placing a comforting hand on her arm. "Different stories, same fight, and because it's the right thing to do." Within hours, Clara Reed and Julian Reed packed their essentials. Their first safe house was a cozy basement apartment owned by a retired professor and his wife. Over the next days, they moved to homes with a nurse practitioner, a young couple running a community center, and an elderly woman whose son had faced discrimination decades earlier. Each family provided meals, emotional care, and even child care, so Clara Reed could attend legal strategy sessions with Victoria Lane. Meanwhile, Derek Hayes combed through his contacts for alternative medical recommendations, despite their best efforts. Julian Reed's tremors and concentration issues worsened without proper treatment. Though Victoria Lane had already filed motions to recuse Judge Catherine Ellis, the court's wheels turned slowly. 5 days after leaving the hospital, Clara Reed's secure email pinged with a cryptic message: "Need to meet. Important information. Skyward Cafe. 2 p.m. Come alone." Olivia Chen doubt filled her. Could it be a trap in an emergency call? Derek Hayes warned. Blackwood may be setting a lure, or she might genuinely help. Victoria Lane decided to send Derek Hayes in Clara Reed's stead, with herself shadowing at a discreet distance at the bustling airport cafe. Derek Hayes claimed Clara Reed had urgent childcare duty. He picked a corner seat with clear sight lines. When Olivia Chen entered in civilian clothes and signature large sunglasses, he recognized her instantly. She looked worn, glancing over her shoulder. "Where's Clara?" she asked, voice low. "Safe," Derek Hayes replied. "Why meet me instead?" She slid a small thumb drive across the table. "I was fired the day after I left you," she said bitterly. "They confiscated my phone, forced me to sign an NDA, but I backed up the cockpit audio to my personal cloud." Derek Hayes nodded, encouraging her to continue. "It has every moment Henry Blackwood's slur, the slap, the threats, Julian Reed's cries. It's irrefutable." He took the drive. Why risk everything he asked quietly? Because it was wrong. "I can't be complicit in protecting people like him," she said, eyes resolute. After texting Victoria Lane, Derek Hayes escorted Olivia Chen to their current safe house, where Clara Reed and Rev. Margaret Clark waited. Olivia Chen wept as she apologized for not intervening sooner. "I was trained to de-escalate, to avoid upsetting high-value passengers," she explained. "The whole system protects people like Henry Blackwood." Moments later, Victoria Lane secured the thumb drive and began authentication. "This will pierce the gag order," she said. "A new judge can't ignore clear audio proof." But triumph was fleeting. The next morning, a motion arrived Henry. Blackwood's lawyers sought to exclude the recording, calling it illegally obtained. At the same time, Olivia Chen received a cease and desist threatening criminal charges for theft of proprietary information. "How did they know?" Clara Reed asked. Stunned, Derek Hayes's face darkened. "They're monitoring us, our emails, our phones, maybe even Victoria's office." A scan of Olivia Chen's devices revealed spyware installed remotely before her firing. The betrayal cut deep if Olivia Chen was compromised. Who else was? They immediately adopted encrypted communications provided by a trusted veterans network. Victoria Lane worked through the night, drafting motions to protect evidence and challenge every intimidation tactic. Community support swelled. A black physicians group offered to document Julian Reed's health decline. A retired judge gave procedural advice. A local pharmacy provided medication at cost, and a toy store sent care packages to brighten Julian Reed's days. Still, Henry Blackwood's media machine escalated, running stories questioning Clara Reed's fitness as a single mother. An op-ed implied Derek Hayes was exploiting the situation. The attacks turned deeply personal. But Clara Reed, Derek Hayes, Victoria Lane, and Rev. Margaret Clark stood firm. Each wave of pressure only reinforced their resolve they would defend Julian Reed's rights, expose the corruption, and ensure that even the most powerful could be held to account. Even in the soft lamplight of the community organizer's safe house, the strain on the group was palpable. Clara Reed's frame had grown slenderer, her once bright eyes shadowed by sleepless nights and unending worry. Derek Hayes drifted in and out of restless dozes on the sofa, haunted by the echoes of combat and the knowledge that his vigilance now extended to protecting a child from a far more insidious enemy. But it was Julian Reed who bore the deepest scars, denied the treatment he needed, uprooted from every routine, and acutely aware of his mother's fear. The boy's tiny hands trembled more each day. His focus fractured into moments so brief that completing a single puzzle piece became a Herculean task. Worse still, the absent seizures, those blank, unresponsive stretches, had become alarmingly frequent. A pediatric neurologist from their support network delivered the grim verdict without prompt, specialized care. Julian Reed risked permanent neurological damage. When Clara Reed collapsed against Victoria Lane, tears mingled with rage. "What kind of person does this to a child?" she sobbed. Victoria's arms tightened around her. "We document everything, every symptom, every seizure, every sleepless night. This evidence will serve not only our civil claims but also criminal charges for endangering a child. The following morning brought fresh trials. As Victoria Lane prepared to file new motions, her paralegal burst in with urgent news the firm's largest client, one whose retainer kept her small practice afloat, threatened to withdraw unless the Parker case was dropped. Without hesitation, Victoria instructed, "Return their retainer. No client is worth compromising our integrity." That evening, at yet another safe house, Olivia Chen received word from a former colleague the airline intended to press criminal charges against her for stealing proprietary data. Even as pressure closed in, Derek Hayes reminded everyone of his grandmother's words, "When you're surrounded on all sides, the only way out is through." As dawn rose over Bay Bridge Harbor, Victoria Lane surveyed her office strewn with legal texts and empty coffee cups. The counterattack began in earnest. A comprehensive federal lawsuit naming Henry Blackwood, his media empire, the airline, the hospital, and any party complicit in the orchestrated campaign against the Reeds. "We'll exploit their size against them," she declared. "Each defendant's self-interest will fracture their united front." When Olivia Chen arrived with news of 3 more flight attendants willing to testify to Henry Blackwood's repeated in-flight misconduct, the team sensed a turning point. Derek Hayes launched a crowdfunding campaign through his Veterans Network to cover Julian Reed's medical costs. Within 24 hours, contributions surged, ensuring immediate access to a Canadian specialist if necessary. Stung by their momentum, Henry Blackwood's lawyers filed motions to dismiss on jurisdictional grounds and unleashed a media blitz accusing Clara Reed, Derek Hayes, and Victoria Lane of profiteering. 3 days later, an unexpected phone call changed everything. A settlement offer of $2 million medical support for life, but chained to a draconian non-disclosure agreement demanding the Reeds publicly declare Henry Blackwood innocent. Facing the threat of permanent gagging and her son's irreversible decline, Clara Reed stared at the terms. Would silence and a life raft of care be worth surrendering truth and her child's dignity? Silence fell as the question lingered, a crucible in which justice and survival would clash at the heart of their hardest decision. Yet, Clara Reed stared down at the settlement draft in her hands, her pulse pounding as she traced each restrictive clause with a trembling finger. This was no lifeline. It was a silencing noose. The non-disclosure agreement demanded that she, a mother whose only crime was seeking justice for her son's assault, renounce every truth she had lived, no public statements, no whispered confidences, not even therapy notes. Julian Reed would grow up under the same gag, forced to nod at a lie when he learned of the man who had struck him on a plane. The settlement's kicker cut deepest. Clara Reed must issue a public statement blaming her own misunderstanding, labeling Henry Blackwood's brutal slap nothing more than an overcautious passenger's attempt to maintain safety. In other words, she would brand herself a liar and absolve her child's assailant. She raised her eyes to Victoria Lane, whose own gaze was taut with sympathy and fury. Earlier that day, Dr. Elaine Brooks, under the hospital's board pressure, had confirmed that, without the specialized therapy he so desperately needed, Julian Reed's tremors and absent seizures would accelerate permanent damage. The neurologist's flat pronouncement still echoed in Clara Reed's mind. "It's your decision." Her throat constricted. Could she betray her son's dignity for the promise of care? The weight of that question pressed on her chest, Late that evening, within the warm safety of Margaret Clark's parlor, Derek Hayes returned with news that lifted and broke her heart in the same breath the veterans-backed crowdfunding had eclipsed its goal, and Johns Hopkins had offered to review Julian Reed's case. Options existed beyond Henry Blackwood's blood money trap. Clara Reed set the settlement papers aside. "He wants more than my silence," she said softly. "He wants vindication." Her gaze hardened. "He wants me to rewrite our story so he can run for office without this stain on his record." Silence filled the room, broken only by the low hum of the storm outside. Then Clara Reed lifted her head. "He doesn't get it. Julian Reed and I won't be silenced, not for any amount of money." By dawn, Victoria Lane had filed the formal rejection, but the reprisal was swift and ruthless at Alexandra's office door. A social worker and 2 officers presented a court order for an emergency welfare check, alleging Clara Reed's neglect and unfit housing. The timing made it clear this was Henry Blackwood's retaliation. Inside, the social worker combed through every corner of Clara Reed's temporary home, while Victoria Lane argued the family's exhaustive efforts to secure treatment and stable housing. The check would proceed. She secured with her present but no removal without a full hearing. As they left, the shadow of surveillance trailed them. Cameras in every corridor, whispers at the front desk. The message was clear. Any misstep, no matter how small, could be construed as proof of neglect. That night, Clara Reed watched Julian Reed sleep beneath the soft glow of his nightlight, his face gaunt and trembling. The nightmares that once haunted his nights had been replaced by feverish dreams of needles and cold hospital walls. She brushed a strand of hair from his forehead, her voice a vow I won't let him win. "Whatever it takes, we'll get through this together." Hours later, Olivia Chen appeared at the guest house door, eyes wide with urgency. She'd triangulated a new lead, a pilot from their flight, willing to testify to Henry Blackwood's pattern of disruptive, racist behavior and the airline's complicity in covering it up. This testimony, vetted and credible, could shatter Blackwood's defense and lift the gag order permanently. But before they could integrate this breakthrough, Derek Hayes received a message that chilled them to the bone. Henry Blackwood had filed for a custody evaluation, accusing Clara Reed of exploiting her son for financial gain, citing her single-parent status and frequent relocations. The final blow. This was more than harassment. It was an assault on her very right to mother her child. Lightning flashed against the guesthouse windows as Clara Reed, Derek Hayes, Victoria Lane, and Margaret Clark gathered around the kitchen table. Their exhausted faces were illuminated by the storm's flickers, faces marked by sleepless nights and endless battles. Clara Reed pressed Julian Reed's small hand. He lay on the sofa, skin pale, tremors flickering like frightened moths under his blanket. She whispered, "I'm so sorry, baby." Even as her own resolve steel-hardened, Derek Hayes repeated the old wartime adage, "When you're surrounded on all sides, the only way out is through." This was their crucible. Surrounded by money, power, and corruption, they had no choice but to break through. By dawn, Victoria Lane stood at her desk, legal briefs stacked like armor. Derek Hayes brought her coffee, his first full night's rest hours ago, and she accepted the cup with a tired, wry smile. "Defense was never enough," she said. "Today, we strike, their targets, Henry Blackwood himself, his media empire, his airline, his hospitals, and every official who aided his vendetta. Each lawsuit, motion, and public revelation would be a pickaxe against the mountain of privilege. As the storm broke into morning rain, they departed for the courthouse with Julian Reed in Margaret Clark's care. Each step echoing the truth they refused to abandon that justice, a mother's love in action, could outlast even the most powerful oppressor. Morning mist curled around the tidy Cape Cod where Clara Reed and Julian Reed now sought refuge. Through the peephole, Clara Reed saw two sharply dressed women caseworkers dispatched by the state. Her heart pounded as she opened the door. "Mrs. Reed, I'm Diana Walker from the Department of Children and Family Services," announced the taller of the two, voice neutral. "This is my colleague, Angela Torres. We're here for the scheduled home visit." Despite endless coaching from Victoria Lane, Clara Reed's hands trembled. She ushered them inside the cozy living room, where the retired professor's books lined the shelves. "Julian Reed is still sleeping," she said, guiding them toward the kitchen. "He had a rough night medication adjustment side effects." Diana Walker placed a heavy folder on the table. "We'll need to see him before we leave," she said, tone clinical. "We also have questions about your case." What followed was an exhaustive, stinging interrogation disguised as protocol. Every corner of their lives was laid bare: parenting choices, medical care gaps, the rotating network of safe houses, the patchwork of financial support, and the ongoing lawsuits linking Henry Blackwood to every injustice they'd endured. "How many moves in the past 3 weeks?" Angela Torres asked, scanning her clipboard. "7. Clara Reed whispered. "Threats forced us each time." Diana Walker's pen scratched. "And school, Julian Reed missed nearly a month. We see you arranged home assignments and tutoring through community contacts. Yet hospital records show he was denied treatment and not placed in any alternative program." The implication rang clear neglect. Clara Reed steadied her voice. "We sought every specialist. Many refused once they learned of Henry Blackwood's interference." After an hour, they peered at Julian Reed's pale form under his blanket. His tiny hands trembled even in sleep. Dark circles shadowing his closed eyes, Diana Walker woke him gently. Conducting a brief assessment, hunger, comfort, safety, he answered with rote calm, but his eyes betrayed confusion and fear. Returning to the kitchen, Diana Walker delivered the verdict. "We'll file today. You'll receive another visit in 3 days. This case will be under expedited review." Their departure left a heavy hush. Clara Reed sank against the door frame, tears finally slipping free. She called Victoria Lane immediately. Within the hour, Derek Hayes arrived alongside her. Faces grave, they recounted every invasive question and the slanted conclusions drawn. "I looked up Diana Walker," Derek Hayes said, voice low. "She used to work at a nonprofit funded by the Blackwood Foundation." Victoria Lane's eyes flickered with controlled anger. Conflict of interest. "We file a motion to have her removed now." Their strategy session went late into the night. Victoria Lane drafted emergency filings to bar any biased caseworker, to demand full medical files, and to expose Henry Blackwood's campaign finance ties. But time was against them. At dawn, they arrived at the family court before Judge Meredith Green. The near-empty courtroom whispered of deliberate secrecy. Diana Walker took the stand first, delivering her damning testimony: instability, missed care, fractured housing, photos thin frame. Visible tremors were brandished as evidence of neglect. The department's attorney urged removal to state custody, arguing a mother consumed by a lawsuit could not protect her child. Then Victoria Lane rose, voice steady. She revealed Henry Blackwood's interference, the airline's lost footage, the hospital board's $10 million endowment tied to Blackwood, the NDA's forcing silence. She pressed character statements from Julian Reed's teachers, medical affidavits documenting worsening tremors and seizures, and eyewitness accounts of the assault. This is not neglect, she concluded. This is a mother defending her child from a powerful man's vendetta. Just as momentum shifted, the department's attorney produced a sealed envelope for Judge Meredith Green, inside medical records of Clara Reed's depression treatment 3 years prior, supposedly confidential, now weaponized to question her stability under stress. Clara Reed gasped. Her private therapy, protected by privacy laws, was thrown into the public record. Judge Meredith Green scanned the file with a furrowed brow. Then, voice firm. Given these extraordinary circumstances, the pattern of external interference, the family's diligent efforts, and the child's deteriorating condition, I will allow the child to remain in parental care under court oversight. Further neglect findings will require a full hearing. In the meantime, no change in custody. Relief crashed over Clara Reed in sobs. Derek Hayes gripped her hand. Victoria Lane gathered her papers, expression resolute. As they left, the storm clouds broke both literal and figurative. Outside, sunlight glinted on the courthouse steps. Clara Reed had weathered the fiercest assault on her ability to mother her son. Though the path ahead remained fraught, they emerged united and unbowed, ready for the battles still to come. The knock at the door came with quiet precision, through the peephole. Clara Reed watched two women in professional attire approach the porch of the modest Cape Cod home that had been their sanctuary in recent days. The house belonged to Rev. Margaret Clark, a retired civil rights attorney whose congregation had rallied around Clara and her son. Now, it seemed the very system meant to protect children was being turned against them. Clara's heart pounded as she drew a shaky breath and opened the door. Standing before her were Diana Walker and Angela Torres, caseworkers from the Department of Children and Family Services. Diana, tall and composed, carried a thick folder stamped with the department's seal. Angela, clipboard in hand, offered a polite nod. "Mrs. Reed," Diana began in a measured tone. "I'm Diana Walker. This is my colleague, Angela Torres. We're here for the scheduled home visit." Clara's hand shook as she stepped aside to admit them. Though Victoria Lane had coached her on handling this moment with firm tone and courteous restraint, nothing could have erased the dread that coiled in her stomach. She led them through the cozy living room, past shelves lined with books donated by Rev. Margaret Clark, to the kitchen where morning light spilled over a table set with coffee and pastries. "I prepared coffee," Clara said softly, gesturing to the spread. "Julian is still resting." Diana placed the folder on the table, her pen poised. "Thank you. Before we begin, we'll need to see him per protocol. Then we'll have some questions regarding your case." Clara nodded and led them to the hallway. As they passed the living room window, she caught Derek Hayes's eye, his jaw tight, posture alert. His presence was a quiet reassurance in this moment of vulnerability. They entered Julian Reed's small bedroom, where he lay under a soft blanket, thin and pale but resting at last. His slight tremors still rippled beneath his calm breathing. Diana knelt beside the bed. "Good morning, Julian," she said gently, setting aside professional detachment for a moment. "I'm Diana. How are you feeling?" Julian's eyes opened briefly. He blinked at the stranger, then at Clara. "Okay," he whispered. Angela directed him through simple questions: whether he was hungry, if he had nightmares, whether he felt safe. He answered dutifully, but without sparkle. Each tremor of his hand, each momentary stare into nothingness, weighed heavily on Clara's heart. Back in the kitchen, Diana and Angela settled into chairs. Angela began with routine inquiries. "Mrs. Reed, can you walk me through your housing arrangements over the past month?" Clara met her gaze. "We've moved 7 times in 3 weeks. Each location was chosen for safety after threats related to the legal case." Angela typed notes: school attendance missing 4 weeks. We arranged home assignments and tutoring through community contacts. Angela's pen scratched. Medical care records show denied treatment at Riverside Pediatric Center and no alternative program enrollment. Clara's voice hardened. "We consulted every specialist. Many declined once they learned of Henry Blackwood's influence." Diana opened her folder to survey the notes. "Financial stability requires explanation. You're on leave from your nursing job." Clara swallowed. "Placed on leave due to hospital policy after media coverage. But our funds come from crowdfunding, care packages, and Reverend Clark's support network." Angela flipped through pages. "Your legal actions and injunctions, the court's gag order, are noted. The ongoing dispute with Mr. Blackwood, understood." Their scrutiny felt accusatory, as if desperation were neglect. Clara gripped the edge of the table. "I'm protecting my son from a man who assaulted him. Every choice was made for his safety." Diana's expression remained neutral. "We will include these details in our report. Mrs. Reed, given the unusual circumstances, the review process will be expedited. We expect to schedule another visit within 3 days." Clara nodded, but her relief was hollow. "Thank you," she managed. As Diana and Angela left, Clara sank into a chair, tears brimming. She called Victoria Lane, voice breaking as she recounted the ordeal. Within the hour, Derek Hayes and Victoria arrived, faces pale but resolute. They listened. "I dug into Diana Walker's background," Derek said. "She worked for a nonprofit funded by the Blackwood Foundation. Conflict of interest." Victoria's eyes narrowed. "We file a motion to bar her involvement. Fast." She tapped her tablet, drafting emergency paperwork. Their strategy meeting stretched into the night, fueled by coffee and grim determination. They consolidated medical records, school reports, witness affidavits, and financial documents. Every shred of proof that Henry Blackwood had mobilized the system against Clara and her son became ammunition. By dawn, they arrived at the family courthouse before Judge Meredith Green. The nearly empty courtroom, with its hushed air and distant light, underscored the stakes an emergency hearing, scheduled without formal notice to minimize attention. Diana Walker testified first, delivering her standard-issue assessment: multiple moves, missed treatments, unstable environment. She brandished photographs of Julian's thin frame and tremors as alleged evidence of neglect. Then Victoria rose. She spoke with measured force, dismantling Diana's narrative. She laid out Henry Blackwood's web of influence, the airline's lost footage, the hospital board's multi-million-dollar donations, the gag order silencing Clara. She introduced character statements from teachers who witnessed Julian's attentive engagement before the assault, and medical affidavits detailing his worsening seizures without proper care. At every turn, Victoria pressed, "This is not neglect. This is the deliberate displacement of a mother protecting her child from a powerful aggressor." As the judge listened, tension crackled. Then, the department's attorney produced a sealed envelope Clara's private mental health records from her post-divorce therapy accessed and leaked illegally, now weaponized to question her fitness. Clara's breath caught her trusted sanctuary violated. Judge Meredith Green reviewed the records in silence, then cleared her throat. Given the extraordinary circumstances, external interference, documented assault, ongoing legal restraint, I will permit the child to remain with his mother under close court supervision. Any further concerns must be addressed in a full hearing. Relief and gratitude washed over Clara. She sank to her knees before Julian, who slept in Revet Margaret Clark's care outside. Derek and Victoria exchanged a solemn nod, knowing this victory was fragile but vital. As they emerged from the courthouse, Clara's legs felt unsteady. The winds of power and privilege still blew fiercely, but for a moment, justice, steady, impartial justice, had prevailed. Though the road ahead remained long, they stepped forward together, determined to hold the promise of protection and love above every threat. Clara Reed paced just outside the gray stone facade of Oakwood State Medical Center, her mind a whirlwind of fear and fury. Through the tinted window, she glimpsed Julian Reed's small silhouette against the glare of the fluorescent hallway lights. The string of events that had brought them here, an impulsive slap at 30,000 feet, a mother's unending fight, a businessman's vengeance leveraged through power, felt like a dark spiral she couldn't escape. Inside, visitation rules droned in her ears 1 hour. No discussion of treatment, no confusing conversations. When Diana Walker and Angela Torres had first cornered her for the home visits, Clara had answered every invasive question with calm determination. She'd moved 7 times, secured tutoring, cobbled together funds from crowdfunding, siblings, and strangers moved by Rev. Margaret Clark's advocacy. Yet here she was, barred from knowing what medicines were coursing through Julian's veins. Olivia Chen's earlier revelations about the cockpit recording had given them hope. The next breakthrough pilot testimony promised to shatter Henry Blackwood's media chokehold. But now, as a new nurse ushered her into the visitation room, that hope felt fragile. "Mrs. Reed," said Nurse Helen Mercer without looking up. "Discussions of treatment protocols during visitation are discouraged. It can confuse the patient and interfere with his progress." Clara's knuckles white on the edge of the table. "I'm a registered nurse and his mother. I have a right to know what medications he's receiving." Nurse Mercer's eyes flicked up, impassive. "That information can be requested through formal channels. Doctor, Mercer will conduct the family consultation next week." Next week, Clara's blood ran crimson. "That's unacceptable. I demand to speak with his physician today. Doctor, Mercer's schedule is full," the nurse replied, stepping back. The chair scraped as she withdrew. Clara fought the urge to scream. Instead, she knelt beside Julian Reed, brushing damp strands of hair from his fevered forehead. "Mommy's here," she whispered. His eyes fluttered open, pale and haunted. When the attendant announced the hour was up, Julian clung to Clara's hand like a lost child. "Don't leave me here. Mommy," he pleaded. "The nightmares. Sometimes I can't feel my fingers." Clara's heart shattered. She forced herself up, gently unwinding his tiny fingers from her sweater. Each step away from him felt like betrayal. Outside, she called Victoria Lane on trembling legs. "They're medicating him improperly," she reported through tears, voice cracking. "Neurological side effects, and I can't see his doctor for days." Victoria's reply was steel. "File an emergency motion for medical oversight today." Derek's arranged for Johns Hopkins to review Julian's records. Hang on. Back at Victoria Lane's office. Clara's phone rang again. Dr. Marcus Chen, Julian's original neurologist, spoke in low tones. "Clara, I've been following your case. Many of us are disturbed. They've put Julian on a contraindicated regimen, phenobarbital at adult dosages. I've filed my own concerns, but wanted you to know directly." Clara's knees buckled. "Thank you, Doctor." She relayed the news to Victoria, who punched keys into her tablet, weaving the new evidence into an emergency petition, even as they planned. Derek Hayes returned with grim news. Henry Blackwood had bragged to his campaign manager about neutralizing the Reed problem, leveraging a personal relationship with the state facility's medical director classmates at Harvard. Apparently, every thread of influence now tied back to the man they fought that night as rain lashed Rev. Margaret Clark's guest house. Clara sat beside Julian's bed, watching his shallow breaths. Each tremor, each ragged eyelash etched itself into her soul. "I won't let him win," she vowed into the dark, voice raw with grief and resolve. By dawn, Victoria Lane had secured a judge's emergency order for Clara to see Julian without delay. They arrived at the ICU just past midnight, paperwork in hand. The night administrator, stunned by the court's urgency, finally let Clara through. Julian lay amidst wires and monitors, his small chest rising under the ventilator's hum. His face was ghostly. But when he sensed Clara's presence, his lips curved in a fleeting smile. A different neurologist, one without ties to the Blackwood network, approached. He experienced status epilepticus. She explained gently. This protocol nearly triggered it. Adult phenobarbital combined with other meds lowered his seizure threshold. Clara's worst fears confirmed the hospital had weaponized his treatment to prop up Henry Blackwood's narrative of neglect. Tears pricked her eyes as she cradled Julian's hand, each pulse a reminder of the personal stakes of this battle. That morning, Judge Meredith Green took the bench. Clara emerged from the ICU with Derek and Victoria, faces etched with exhaustion but burning with purpose. They would challenge every unlawful move, expose every hidden alliance, and demand justice not just for Julian, but for every child whose safety was sacrificed on the altar of privilege. As the hospital doors closed behind her, Clara Reed inhaled the crisp autumn air. Her son's life hung in the balance, but so did the promise of a system that, if unguarded, would bend to the will of the powerful, shoulder to shoulder with her allies. She stepped forward, determined to bend it back. The hum of medical equipment was the only sound in Julian Reed's ICU room until the ventilator's tube was quietly removed. Clara Reed leaned over her son's still, pale face, brushing a cool cloth across his forehead. He remained unconscious, his small chest rising in shallow breaths. Derek Hayes and Victoria Lane had taken shifts through the long night to ensure Clara was never alone with staff who might twist her concern into new accusations. But, as Clara watched the steady beep of the monitor, Her thoughts drifted to the settlement offer from Henry Blackwood, the one that promised care in exchange for absolute silence. For the first time, she considered signing perhaps the NDA's chains were a small price for her son's safety. A soft knock at the door broke her reverie. Victoria Lane entered, eyes bright with cautious optimism. "I have news," she whispered, lightly shaking Clara's shoulder. "Doctor, Marcus Chen filed a report last night questioning the medication protocol. They've initiated an internal review and put a hold on any changes to Julian's treatment without approval from the hospital's ethics committee." Relief washed over Clara. It was the first ray of hope in days, a temporary reprieve from the system's weaponization. Yet, as she looked down at Julian's fragile form, still unconscious after a violent seizure, doubt crept back in. Was it too little? Too late? How many more hits could the boy's developing brain endure? Clara's heart pounded. She had fought through courtroom battles, media smears, and covert sabotage. Now, the hospital itself was under siege, its own ethics protocol shielding Julian from further harm. But would that be enough? The thought flickered in her mind perhaps they needed a fresh start, far from Henry Blackwood's grasp, Canada, or somewhere beyond, where she could rebuild Julian's life in peace, as if sensing her turmoil. Derek Hayes slipped in beside her, placing a steadying hand on her shoulder. "Whatever you decide," he said softly, "you're not alone. Sometimes the darkest moments come just before breakthrough." Clara managed a tired nod. She desperately wanted to believe him. But when a new team of doctors entered strangers whose allegiances were unknown, her confidence wavered. She could not afford another betrayal. 3 days later, Victoria Lane stood in the discreet private dining room of Maison Laurent, one of Boston's most exclusive restaurants. Thick carpets, muffled footsteps, heavy draperies shielded the room from prying eyes. Waitstaff moved like shadows, bowls of fruit and delicate pastries appearing without notice. For Victoria, the setting was both intimidating and hopeful. Whoever had chosen this venue clearly had resources and reasons none too benevolent. She checked her watch 10 minutes past their appointment time. She had been stood up before by false leads and traps, but today she held a thin folder of evidence that could topple an empire. She steeled herself as the door opened. In glided a woman in her early 50s, draped in a tailored cream suit and diamonds that caught the light in discreet flashes. Victoria's breath caught. She recognized the woman instantly. "Ms. Lane, thank you for meeting me," the woman said, voice cool yet edged with genuine contrition. "I'm Victoria Blackwood." Victoria Lane's mind raced. Victoria Blackwood, the ex-wife of Henry Blackwood and a philanthropist in her own right, had been silent for years after their bitter divorce. She moved with effortless grace as she settled across from Victoria Lane, kicking away the waiter's menu. "I haven't been Mrs. Blackwood for nearly 5 years," she said, a half-smile touching her lips. "Please, call me Victoria." Victoria Lane inclined her head, heart hammering. "This is unexpected." Victoria Blackwood reached into her handbag and extracted a slim flash drive, placing it on the polished table. "I've followed the Reed case closely. What Henry has done to that child and to you is unconscionable. This drive contains documentation you need." Victoria Lane stared, the drive's unassuming presence brimming with potential power. "Why help now?" she asked, voice steady despite the shock. Victoria Blackwood's gaze flickered with pain. I should have done this during our divorce. Instead, I took the settlement, signed the NDA, and convinced myself the money would do more good through my foundation than a public fight would. I was wrong. He continued destroying lives everyone who crossed him or threatened his plans. She leaned forward. I cannot stay silent while he targets a child. This drive holds financial records, emails, medical documents, even evidence of previous cover-ups, racial incidents he ordered buried, payoffs to suppress victims, a network of insiders across media, medical boards, and law enforcement. Victoria Lane's mind whirled. The possibilities were staggering. "This violates your NDA," she whispered. Victoria Blackwood's expression turned resolute. "I'm prepared to face the consequences, punitive damages that would ruin me financially. I've transferred my assets out of his reach into trusts for my daughter. I've burned the ships behind me." Victoria Lane absorbed the gravity of that sacrifice. Why not go to authorities directly? Her guest shook her head. "Henry controls the authorities. He plays golf with the police commissioner, funds the district attorney's campaigns, sits on judicial boards. Nothing happens without his say-so. We must use this information strategically to fracture his power structure, not play into his hands." She tapped the drive. "Release it all at once, and the story gets buried. But targeted use exposing one corrupt judge, one compromised hospital board member can topple his network." Their conversation turned tactical names of compromised officials, key pressure points, potential allies among his own disillusioned associates. When they parted, Victoria Lane left with the drive and a promise to wield this intelligence with precision. Back at Margaret Clark's parlor converted into a temporary command center, Clara Reed, Derek Hayes, and Victoria Lane gathered around a small laptop. Tension crackled as Victoria Lane plugged in the drive. First, a trove of financial ledgers, hidden foundations, offshore accounts funneling millions to local officials and institutions. Next, internal emails, boardroom conversations detailing payoffs to hush settlements. Then, medical board minutes showing votes influenced by Henry Blackwood's donations, votes that had denied Julian Reed's care. Piece by piece, the true architecture of his empire emerged: a private intelligence operation employing former law enforcement, contractors recruiting compromising intelligence on adversaries, and a media machine amplifying his preferred narrative. Derek Hayes reviewed a list of compromised judges and hospital trustees. Clara Reed scanned witness lists, former colleagues now willing to testify. With each revelation, their plan crystallized. They would trigger targeted resignations, compel recusal motions, and release specific exposés in sequence to maintain press attention and legal momentum. As dawn broke, they moved into action. Victoria Lane prepared motions to recuse 2 judges and subpoena key documents. Derek Hayes notified veterans groups and allied journalists. Clara Reed drafted a public statement. The assault, the cover-up, the weaponization of medical care, all detailed alongside the new evidence. By midday, the first fractures appeared. A judge quietly stepped down. Hospital administrators announced internal probes. Media outlets unbound by Henry Blackwood's influence rushed to cover the emerging scandal. The meticulous, strategic release of Victoria Blackwood's data had done its work. Clara Reed watched the headlines grow more damning by the hour. Hope glimmered as supporters rallied, and for the first time since that fateful flight, she felt that the tide was turning. Against all odds, This family's fight, bolstered by unexpected allies and unwavering resolve, had become a reckoning the powerful could no longer ignore. Clara Reed never left Julian's side after that seizure. Through the long night in the pediatric ICU, she sat vigil, Victoria Lane and Derek Hayes taking turns at her back, so she would never be alone with staff who might twist her worry into fresh accusations. At dawn, the monitors stilled enough for the respirator tube to come out. Julian lay breathing steadily, but still unconscious. Clara dipped a fresh cloth in cool water and gently wiped his brow. Each drop of liquid felt like a promise that somewhere, somehow, they might still win this. But as she watched the slow rise and fall of his chest, an impossible question formed: was the legal crusade worth more than her son's fragile life? The settlement offer from Henry Blackwood, $2 million for medical care, but sealed with an NDA so ironclad it would silence them forever, beckoned like a dark bargain. Victoria appeared at the doorway, rubbing sleep from her eyes but carrying the rarest of tidings. The on-call neurologist, she whispered, filed a report last night. They've put a hold on any changes to Julian's treatment, without the ethics committee's approval. A flicker of hope warmed Clara's chest at that moment. The system, flawed though it was, finally checking its own impulses. Yet even that glimmer paled beside Julian's inert form. He'd suffered a prolonged status epilepticus, no simple absent seizure, and Clara knew those hours of uncontrolled firing in his brain might leave permanent scars. The question she had wrestled with for days returned. Could she save him by fleeing beyond Blackwood's reach, Canada, Europe, anywhere that powerful men's reach ended? Derek squeezed her shoulder. "Whatever you choose, you're not alone," he said. "Sometimes the darkest hour precedes dawn." Clara managed a weary nod. She needed that dawn. 3 days later, Clara, Derek, and Victoria convened in Victoria Lane's office-turned-operations room. A crumpled takeout container and stacks of legal files crowded the desk. But Victoria slid a slim envelope across the surface with deliberate gravity. "Our next ally," she said. Together they traveled downtown to Maison Laurent, a hushed enclave for Boston's elite. Thick rugs muffled their footsteps. Ornate sconces cast pools of light. Victoria Lane glanced at her reflection in a polished mirror conservative suit. No-nonsense posture, then eased into a high-backed chair. If her mysterious contact truly had the clout to stand here, then maybe they had a chance. When the door opened, Victoria Blackwood entered, all poise and whispered power. "Thank you for coming," she said, settling across from Victoria Lane. A single business card lay on the table, the only trace of her private line. She pulled out a slim flash drive and placed it before them. "Everything you need is here," she intoned. Victoria Lane's breath caught. "Why risk this now?" Victoria Blackwood paused, her grace momentarily giving way to raw honesty. "I regretted my silence 5 years ago when I walked away with my settlement. Henry continued to wreck lives. I cannot stand by while he destroys a child." Her fingers brushed the drive. It contains bank records, internal emails, medical board minutes, and surveillance logs, proof of his private intelligence network, former agents, hackers, even insiders at the state hospital. That revelation crackled through the room like electricity. Victoria Lane exchanged a look with Clara Reed. The stakes had never been higher. Back at the safe house, the team worked swiftly. Derek secured encrypted lines to veteran contacts. Clara drafted public statements. Victoria Lane set up a standalone laptop. The flash drive, the only data source her office servers, too, compromised now. They pored over the contents ledgers showing offshore trusts, funding local judges, emails ordering NDAs to bury discrimination claims, surveillance reports on Clara's home, medical board minutes proving Henry Blackwood's donations dictated treatment policies. One folder bore Judge Hargrove's name evidence he'd hidden his son's DUI record at Blackwood's insistence. Victoria Lane laid out the plan. We don't publicly expose Hargrove. We just let him know we have the file. He'll recuse himself to avoid scandal. Next, they targeted the hospital trustee who had killed Julian's transcranial trial. Her pharmaceutical firm had profited from Blackwood's coverage deals. One phone call, Victoria said, and she'll step down rather than face a federal ethics probe. But then Derek's encrypted phone buzzed. Their safe house security system had been compromised. They've broken in, he whispered. They took my laptop and some files. Clara's heart pounded. Victoria Blackwood's timing had been perfect. But someone had moved faster to intercept the flash drive's provenances. Their window was closing. We don't wait, Victoria Lane declared. Tonight, we strike. Derek texted veteran allies to monitor Blackwood's associates. Clara called Rev. Clark to arrange discreet, safe transport. Victoria drafted motions to recuse Hargrove, subpoena the trustee's emails, and file fraud charges against Blackwood's charitable fronts. The next morning, Boston Legal Aid's modest conference room brimmed with local and national press. The mismatched chairs and fluorescent lights underscored the David versus Goliath stakes. Victoria Lane stood at the podium flanked by spokespeople from the Veterans Justice Coalition and the Children's Health Advocacy Network. Behind them, a single screen displayed a chain of emails and bank transfers, unassailable links between Blackwood's empire and the systems he'd corrupted. This was an orchestrated assault, Victoria announced, voice unwavering. A child was assaulted in flight, then denied medical care, then branded a neglect case, all to protect one man's power and political ambitions. Camera shutters clicked as reporters leaned forward. Outside, Blackwood media outlets scrambled to craft denials. But Judge Hargrove, faced with the non-public knowledge that his own record might surface, submitted his recusal without comment. The hospital trustee resigned under a worn statement of personal reasons. 3 former Kensington media employees, emboldened by the public conference, came forward with corroborating stories of discrimination silenced by hush money. Clara Reed, standing at the back, felt something shift. The authorities, institution by institution, were finally fracturing the shield around Henry Blackwood. The aftermath would be long, perilous, and far from over. Yet, as the crowd spilled out into the sudden spring sunlight, she realized that power, no matter how deep, could not withstand the focused will of truth. Solidarity, and unwavering love for a child named Julian Reed. Thank you all for coming on such short notice, Victoria Lane began, her voice calm but resolute. She stood at a simple podium in the downtown legal aid office, flanked by representatives of the Veterans Justice Coalition, the Urban Rights Legal Defense Fund, and the Children's Health Advocacy Network. The cramped conference room was packed with local reporters, camera crews jostling for position, and community leaders eager to bear witness. Victoria's opening remarks cut straight to the heart of the matter. We are here today to expose a coordinated campaign of corporate misconduct, abuse of power, and systematic discrimination perpetrated by Henry Blackwood and his network of businesses. She recapped the incident aboard the flight, a 7-year-old child brutalized in plain sight, and the subsequent cascade of interference that had denied Julian Reed the medical care he desperately needed. Each allied spokesperson then stepped forward in turn. A veterans advocate detailed how Derek Hayes had found former flight crews willing to testify against Blackwood's pattern of intimidation. A civil rights attorney criticized local news outlets owned by Blackwood's companies for pumping out misleading stories. A child welfare expert described the inappropriate medication Julian had been given in state care. All of their testimonies were tightly focused, relying on independently verifiable evidence rather than emotional appeals, evidence pieced together from leaked internal emails, financial filings, and sworn statements. Meanwhile, Clara Reed sat in a hospital waiting room beside an independent neurologist who had volunteered her expertise. Julian's condition had stabilized since the seizure crisis, but he remained weak, his eyes glassy with residual confusion. The new in-house doctor, the very one installed after Blackwood's allies had pressured the neurology department, visibly tensed as the independent specialist reviewed Julian's chart. That alone spoke volumes. Back at the press conference, a reporter pressed Victoria Lane. "Are you saying, Mr. Blackwood used his influence to retaliate against this family by denying a child medical treatment?" Victoria's answer was unwavering. The evidence shows at least 7 medical professionals were coerced into either denying care or prescribing dangerous protocols. This was deliberate, not accidental. Another journalist asked about Blackwood's planned appearance on National Morning Today in just 20 minutes. His team calls this a smear campaign, the reporter noted. Your response? Victoria's smile flickered. "We welcome Mr. Blackwood's comments. Transparency serves the truth. We are fully prepared to substantiate every allegation in open court with documented evidence and eyewitness testimony." Unbeknownst to the assembled crowd, Henry Blackwood was already seated under bright studio lights, flanked by his friendly host and a small army of makeup artists. His carefully crafted talking points painted him as a philanthropic businessman under unfair attack. He spoke calmly of how an unruly child had disrupted a flight and of his own solely concerned intervention. He denied ever striking Julian, blaming social media activists and overzealous lawyers. But as his segment began, a production assistant burst onto the set. The host's earpiece crackled breaking news. Suddenly, the studio speakers blared the ambient noise of an aircraft cabin, followed by Blackwood's own voice demanding, "Keep your filthy hands off my seat." Then the unmistakable crack of a slap, Julian's cry of pain, and Clara's shocked protest. Blackwood's composure cracked on camera as he attempted to interrupt. Then spluttered legal threats before storming off in fury, his microphone still live, and capturing a tirade to destroy that flight attendant. Within minutes, the audio clip went viral, competing networks aired it, social feeds erupted, and the hashtag #JohnJustice for Julian trended nationwide. By the time Clara returned to Victoria Lane's office, the landscape had shifted dramatically. Major political figures who once courted Blackwood issued statements condemning his actions. The airline announced an internal review of its incident reporting procedures, and, most notably, Judge Meredith Green, who had conspicuously taken leave just before ruling on Clara's custody hearing, had reinstated herself to the family court bench and ordered all Reed-related motions reassigned to her docket for a comprehensive review. Watching the headlines scroll, Derek Hayes whispered, "It's happening. His house of cards is collapsing." Victoria Lane nodded, her expression both hopeful and cautious. This is a powerful blow, but we must press our advantage while they scrambled to recover. Outside, Clara Reed allowed herself a small, wearied smile. The fight was far from over, but for the first time since that slap at 30,000 feet, she believed they had turned the tide. Judge Meredith Green's recusal had been swift once our team demonstrated the depth of systemic interference with Julian's medical care. Now, Judge Elaine Chen presided over Family Court Room 3, determined to restore faith in a justice system crippled by privilege. As the packed gallery fell silent, she reviewed the newly uncovered testimony from hospital staff professionals who, until recently, had been too intimidated to speak. Their accounts painted a damning portrait. Medical orders rescinded, treatments delayed, and alternate protocols imposed by those under Blackwood's sway. Given the extraordinary circumstances, she announced, voice firm but compassionate, and the clear evidence that outside influence compromised Julian Reed's welfare. I hereby order his immediate release from state custody and return to his mother with all necessary arrangements for independent medical care. A ripple of applause swept through the courtroom, but the judge allowed it only briefly before restoring order to protect the dignity of the proceeding. Outside, a crowd of supporters, veterans in uniform, civil rights advocates, child health professionals, and ordinary citizens moved by Clara's fight erupted in cheers. Clara emerged through the courthouse doors, Derek at her side and Victoria Lane just behind. Tears mixing with relief as hands reached out to embrace her, yet Victoria's warning cut through the jubilation. This victory is crucial, but not the end. Henry Blackwood remains dangerous. We must stay vigilant until every legal avenue is resolved. Their resolve was immediately tested at Boston Children's State Facility. Clinical staff balked at releasing Julian despite Judge Chen's order. Security barred Clara at the entrance, citing pending discharge paperwork. As tensions rose, Derek's encrypted line buzzed surveillance footage spotted Henry Blackwood slipping through a private staff entrance 20 minutes earlier. He was somewhere inside. Victoria didn't hesitate. She phoned Judge Chen's chambers. Within the hour, the family court dispatched a marshal and an emergency enforcement order. Faced with legal authority, hospital administrators miraculously found the discharge documents in time. Julian, pale but trembling with excitement, was wheeled toward his mother in a wheelchair. A nurse whispered, "Mr. Blackwood just left through the service corridor. He was furious." Derek relayed to our legal team, and federal authorities were notified. The final reckoning unfolded at a small private airfield outside Boston. Federal agents, sworn to protect civil rights, intercepted Blackwood as he attempted to board his private jet. He was arrested for witness tampering, obstruction of evidence, and civil rights violations charges that pierced even his formidable legal shield. Live footage of handcuffed Henry Blackwood being led away flooded news outlets nationwide. Safe in our secure location. Clara cradled Julian on a sofa. His head rested against her shoulder as he mumbled, "Is it really over?" She stroked his hair, voice soft but certain, almost baby, "And when it is, we'll make sure no other family endures this." Outside, cameras blazed. Inside, they savored the first moments of quiet after the storm. 3 months later, the federal courthouse steps gleamed in autumn sunshine. News vans lined the plaza. Activists held signs reading "Justice for Reed" and "No more power without accountability." Inside, Judge Elaine Chen presided over the settlement hearing what many hailed as the most significant civil rights case in Boston's recent history. In that time, Henry Blackwood's empire had crumbled. Former allies testified against him. His media outlets abandoned him, and banks froze accounts tied to his wrongdoing. Today, the court considered a comprehensive settlement, $10 million for Julian's medical care and lifelong support, $5 million for Clara's lost wages, legal fees, and emotional suffering, mandatory public acknowledgement of wrongdoing, funding for an independent foundation to combat discrimination in healthcare and media, and binding commitments that no Blackwood entity would ever again interfere with the Reed family's lives. Judge Chen reviewed each provision with meticulous care. Then, addressing Clara, she asked, "Mrs. Reed, you have endured unimaginable hardship. Does this settlement reflect true justice for you and your son Clara Rose, composed by months of struggle?" "Your Honor, no compensation can erase my son's pain or the fear he felt," she began, voice steady. "But this agreement secures his future and holds those in power accountable. It also sends a message: privilege does not grant impunity." As Clara spoke, Derek and Victoria exchanged glances of pride. Outside, the world watched, in one resonant moment. A mother's unyielding love, a veteran's unwavering courage, and an attorney's steadfast integrity had toppled a Goliath of influence. The gavel fell, finalizing a victory that affirmed the promise of equal justice under the law and opened a path for many more to follow. The autumn light slanted through the courthouse windows as Clara Reed entered courtroom 3. Derek Hayes at her side and Victoria Lane just behind. 3 months had passed since Henry Blackwood's arrest at the private airfield, a victory that still felt fragile to Clara. Julian Reed, now 8, was home recovering from intensive therapy and the family's new routine of doctor visits and school counseling. Today's hearing would decide whether Blackwood's proposed settlement would finally bring an end to their legal battles or force them to keep fighting. As the late morning session convened, Judge Elaine Chen looked over her glasses at the packed courtroom. Veterans in crisp jackets lined the first rows. Civil rights leaders and medical professionals filled the gallery. Cameras perched up in corners, broadcasting live to a world that had watched every twist of this saga unfold. Before the bench, Blackwood sat unusually subdued in an expensive navy suit. Gone was the swagger of the boardroom, and behind him, the empty chairs where his legal team had dwindled to a bare handful. Their final offer lay on the table: $10 million for Julian's ongoing medical care and education, $5 million to compensate Clara for lost wages, legal fees, and emotional distress, a binding pledge that no Blackwood entity would ever again interfere with the Reeds' lives, and a court-enforced diversity and ethics foundation funded by Blackwood Media Group. Judge Chen began, her voice steady. "I have reviewed the settlement terms and all supporting documentation. Before I render a decision, I wish to hear from the plaintiff." Clara Reed rose slowly, her posture both composed and resolute. This moment had been the culmination of months spent balancing hope and fear. She looked out at the assembly, at veterans who had rallied behind her son, at civil rights advocates who had leveraged every connection, at medical experts who had risked their careers to testify. She drew a breath. "Your Honor," she began, voice clear, "when my son Julian was 7, he was slapped by a stranger at 30,000 feet. That one act of violence was only the beginning. Over the next months, we faced relentless attacks, his medical treatment delayed or perverted, hateful messages, legal gag orders, and even a temporary placement in state custody orchestrated by Mr. Blackwood's influence. My son's neurological condition worsened tremors in his hands, absent seizures, declining concentration, all because he was denied the care he needed. Her gaze shifted to Julian, seated just inside the gallery, clutching Derek's hand. No amount of money can erase his pain. The nights he trembled in fear, or the innocence he lost when he learned that power and privilege could override compassion and justice. Yet this settlement offers the only guarantee we have resources to secure Julian's future specialized therapies, educational support, and medical oversight by experts free from outside pressure. More importantly, it creates public accountability, court monitoring, a foundation to fight discrimination in health care, and a court-enforceable promise that Henry Blackwood will never again wield his influence against us. She paused, voice catching. I accept this settlement not because it heals all wounds, but because it helps ensure no other family endures what we have. I stand here today for Julian, but also for every child whose voice was silenced by someone else's wealth. A hush settled over the room. Judge Chen nodded gravely. Turning to Blackwood's counsel, she asked if their client wished to address the court. Blackwood stood unsteadily. In measured tones, he offered a brief apology. I recognize the harm I caused, and I agree to these terms, but the words felt hollow to many who remembered his televised meltdown. Judge Chen cleared her throat. Having considered the gravity of the allegations, the substantiated evidence of wrongdoing, and the needs of the plaintiff, I find the proposed settlement to be fair and appropriate compensation. Accordingly, it is ordered the settlement is approved. The funds shall be disbursed to an independent escrow account, and the stipulated non-interference and foundation provisions shall be enforced by this court. A palpable wave of relief washed over Clara and her supporters. Cameras flashed as the gavel came down. The final legal barrier had fallen. Outside, the crisp air felt like freedom. Veterans from Derek's network embraced Clara, some tearing up at the sight of Julian Beeman among them. Civil rights organizers cheered, passing around a commemorative sign reading, "Justice Prevails." Reporters sought statements, but Clara raised a hand for quiet. Today is a beginning, she told the crowd. Julian still has therapy ahead, and our family work to heal every day. But we move forward no longer as victims, but as advocates. We will use these resources to help other families, to fund research on childhood neurological conditions, and to ensure that no powerful individual can weaponize the system again. Derek Hayes stepped forward, prosthetic leg gleaming in the midday sun. I'm proud to stand with Clara and Julian, he said. As a veteran, I fought for this country's freedom. Today, that fight continues. Every child deserves safety, dignity, and equal treatment under the law. Victoria Lane closed her laptop, smiling at Julian, and I'll keep fighting for those principles in every courtroom. Julian, clutching his royal blue dinosaur backpack, looked up and grinned. Can we get ice cream now? He asked in a small voice. Laughter rippled through the gathering. Clara lifted him into her arms. As they walked toward the limousine waiting curbside, cameras still flashing, Clara whispered to Julian, "You did it, baby. You and your bravery showed us all the power of speaking truth." He yawned, nestling against her. "I'm hungry," he muttered. Clara kissed his forehead. "Then let's go get that ice cream." Derek held open the car door, and Victoria handed Julian a small toy dinosaur, his first gift after the ordeal. Together, they climbed inside, engines idling, sunlight warming the leather seats. Behind them, Boston's skyline stretched tall, a reminder that even in cities of power and privilege, justice can prevail when good people stand together. And so ended the Reed family's battle, not with a final blow, but with the promise of healing, advocacy, and a future where no child's voice would ever again be drowned out by wealth or fear. As the courtroom doors closed and Julian Reed smiled again, the weight of injustice began to lift, and a new chapter of healing and hope began. Clara's unwavering love, Derek's battlefield courage, and Victoria's strategic brilliance proved that our greatest strength lies in unity and truth. Though the scars remain, each step forward reaffirms that no amount of money or influence can silence the voices of the determined. From tense hospital corridors to packed press rooms, this journey has reminded us that real change demands persistence, heart, and the willingness to speak out no matter the cost. What will you do when faced with unfairness? Will you stay silent or step into the breach? Thank you for witnessing Julian's story and for believing that compassion can triumph over cruelty. If this video moved you, please like, share, and subscribe. Your support amplifies every plea for justice and ensures that no family fights alone. Let's keep the conversation and the momentum going.